to a lot of emphasis on redirection and fake out pressure to stop it coming in. We've seen in the games with close combat avoidance before, collision course avoidance, a whole different ballgame because you can't even let one through.
You talked about that Brute Bonnet, and it's going to make an appearance on the field right away next to this Cayden, and that's going to be the Sun setting up Photosynthesis into the defense. On the opposing end, we have this Ogerpon and this Heatran. So if you are worried about something like a fast Spore, this Ogerpon is something that can direct that hit away, and Heatran can fire back in spades.
You already see the gravity of the Cayden and the collision course threat. These Tropicos teams normally lead the Tropicos because you've got to start trying to get the boosts up so that you can sweep. It's unusual to not see Tropicos led, but it would have just been totally vulnerable here. So instead it's Heatran and Ogerpon, but those are two Pokemon that are also weak to collision course. It's still a lot of damage being threatened by the Cayden without too much response back. Neither of these Pokemon are especially threatening to Cayden, so it's going to be an uphill battle for Cayden to figure out how to get to the Cayden, get it off the field, and not take too much damage in the process and not get too many Pokemon put to sleep in the process.
Crystallization right away in this battle on turn number 1. And I mean, we see a Cayden on the field. And I think the first thing it does is just shed its original typing to go into this fire type. So it's always a great defensive, but as well, when you're looking at the damage output that you want, that can pay off in spades. Of course, this later on, you gotta maybe be a little bit worried, but at this point, both of your Pokemon are going to be safe because Cayden's just opted to go for a double protect. Great way to kind of get that Terrestrialization out and scout out the next move of choice. An attempt at a Flame Charge. And that into the Spiky Shield, it's going to be good for a little bit of chip as well. Spore from Brute Bonnet, attempt into the Heatran. So now you have a lot of this information heading into this next turn.
We get a little bit of extra vulnerability now for Cayden as a fire type weak to Ivy Cudgel from the Ogerpon on the other side, possibly worried about the Terra Fairy Terra Blast from the Heatran on the other side. Of course, that's a big opportunity cost to go for that because it's using the Terrestrialization, which is normally reserved for Tropicos. But Heatran, if it becomes a fairy type and resists fighting, is still immune to fire so can fight pretty well against Cayden. For now, no Terrestrialization, just a follow me for Ogerpon.
So at least when you're looking at a couple of these different options, you can stay safe. And Sucker Punch, one of them, we saw the attempted score last time, also would have been good for this redirection. But Sucker Punch, since it's forced to redirect, it won't do anything. Ogerpon will take a lot of damage. Of course, it would always have that sturdy, so it would have been able to survive a hit either way. But Magma Storm, not the most accurate. It is going to connect, and Brute Bonnet is no more. One hit KO.
Cayden stays one step ahead in this game. The threat of Ivy Cudgel now into the fire-type Cayden means that Daniel can't just go for a Spore and risk that the Ivy Cudgel comes back in. So instead he goes for Sucker Punch plus Flame Charge, trying to pick up the KO onto Ogerpon before it moves. But because Ogerpon just follow me's, there's no KO there, and the Magma Storm picks up the KO into the Brute Bonnet. It has relieved the pressure of the Ivy Cudgel still, though, because now that Ogerpon is damaged, Cayden can freely go into the slot, still not too threatened by the Heatran on the other side. Fluttermane not doing too much here, though. Has to worry about Heavy Slam from Heatran as well as an attack from Ogerpon if we got there, but you have to imagine Ogerpon has much bigger things in mind. But it can just protect or take, basically take up space while this Cayden is so effectively dealing with Cayden. And then, for now, pressure once again relieved. Cayden looking pretty comfortable on the board.
Unless my eyes deceive me, we did get a chance to quickly see the last two Pokemon that Cayden has, and it looked more so like the Screamtail and Incineroar, so opting to leave restricted at home. Get confirmation of that again into a moment, but Cayden's been very good at making sure Pokemon are preserved and to truly scout things out in this match. So again, this is going to be a protect on this turn. Each one of these protects too is closer to getting rid of the Sun, which is definitely going to be reducing the capabilities of the Pokemon on Daniel's side.
Especially if Cayden can get another KO, then there's no ability to switch the Cayden in and out. Leaving Tropicos behind makes a lot of sense. Like I mentioned, it is so vulnerable to the collision course. And if you think one of your best ways to deal with Cayden is Heatran eventually Terastallizing, then you can't really use Tropicos because it's such a hog of that Terastallization, and so you want just maybe more support around it. But it's always a very difficult decision to make and an uphill battle to decide to not use your restricted Pokemon.
It's a brave one, but so far in this match with the momentum taken, seems to be paying off, and since you don't have a Terra Hog on your team, Heatran more than welcome to pick that up. You definitely don't want to leave yourself too susceptible to a hit from this Cayden on the opposing end. This is going to make it a resisted one. Fluttermane, Icy Wind, double connect, and when the Ogerpon's just living on a prayer, that's going to be an Ogerpon that's gone. Heatran's normally pretty slow, but still going to make sure it's just slow for the rest of this. Now Koraidon does get this chance to attack, and Collision Course into the freshly terrestrialized Pokemon is not going to be the damage that it maybe would have wanted, and doesn't even bring it down to below half. Magma Storm, another connect. Fluttermane on the other side of the field gets brought right down into the yellow and now trapped by the Magma. This is going to be some damage between turns, and it's going to ensure next turn it will get KO'd.
This Heatran is getting a lot done. Doesn't take much from Collision Course with the resistance that turn, but it's having to get that done by going after the partner next to Koraidon. As a fire type, Koraidon's not that worried about what Heatran can do with Magma Storm, Terra Blast, Heavy Slam, resisting all 3 attacks. And so at some point, Cayden's not going to be able to win by just attacking a thing next to Koraidon, and so finding the recipe for how to deal with Koraidon itself is pretty important. Maybe that comes down to like Encore disable shenanigans with Screamtail if we really get to that point. Important that Fluttermane was able to hang on. It could have gotten through the Focus Sash with Magma Storm there. It wasn't enough damage to do it.
Koraidon protect on this turn, but it's going to be a protective piece for these fire-type Pokemon. One fake, one real, and now fake out. Of course, when you're looking at the Koraidon on the other end, an Incineroar that's been freshly swapped in, just an attempt at a fake out to stop that makes a lot of sense. Moonblast going to be targeting into the Incineroar just down to about half-ish, but this is going to be the turn the Sunlight is gone. So now Koraidon won't be able to utilize that in next battle, and that Swirling Magma, that Magma Storm, now Fluttermane's been KO'd. You didn't even have to do any damage this turn to get momentum.
Yep, the Protect means that that one Magma Storm is still enough damage to eventually KO the Fluttermane, though it picks up some nice chip on Incineroar on the way out. Oh, but Iron Crown, the perfect piece to have here to deal with Heatran. The pin looks extreme. You have Collision Course going into the Incineroar slot, Tachyon Cutter going into the Heatran slot. There's no redirection to get out of this. There's no fake out to get out of this. There's no Terra to get out of this. Just a ton of damage coming in. Screamtail can come into the Collision Course, but it can't come in to the Tachyon Cutter, just as weak as Heatran is. Iron Crown looks to be in a really good spot. You have to somehow navigate Incineroar to attacking Iron Crown to ever deal with it. But that's going to be really a difficult thing to ask when Koraidon is going to be consistently threatening the Collision Course. You're going to really need some smart disables and encores, something along those lines for Screamtail to be disruptive enough to give a window like that. Otherwise, it looks like Iron Crown really preserved, knowing that opposing game plan that eventually Fairy Terrestrialized Heatran was going to be an option here and having the right Steel attacker in the back to manage it.
Well, you're talking about needing some well-timed Screamtail shenanigans, but swapping into the Heatran slot, it's hard-pressed to see if it's even going to get this opportunity here onto this next turn, as it's going to swap in. Heatran stays safe. Screamtail might have a very different fate. Of course, booster energy speed, that's all going to be normal as Koraidon going for this Flare Blitz, not even attempting maybe to try and see into the slot to catch that Screamtail swap in there. So notably, Incineroar does stay safe, and now it's going to be whether you got this Screamtail in for relatively free. No, Tachyon Cutter doing a good amount of damage that go around. Second one will get the KO, so Screamtail still goes down.
First hit looked like Screamtail might hang on, but it wasn't enough. Putting damage into both slots, I mean, either place Screamtail came in on, it would have just gotten KO'd. Does pay a knockoff cost, but not a knockoff into the Iron Crown, just some extra chip on to the Koraidon, and we're back to the same spot we were last turn. There's a Tachyon Cutter still going one spot, a Collision Course going the other, and it should be a game 1 win for Daniel.
Yeah, and two relatively slow Pokemon that can't really stand up or say anything about it. So here's the Collision Course. Koraidon, you know you're safe for it this time. There's no more swaps available, so that's going to be one piece gone. Incineroar goes down, and yeah, we're just moments away from the Heatran joining that partner Incineroar. And really, really well done. When we had talked about this momentum kind of taken early on, it was all just part of the plan to pin these Pokemon. You get the Terrestrialization out, and the Iron Crown until the end was just perfect. So Heatran officially KO'd, and with that, Anil up 1 in the set.
The Heatran is really cool tech to try to win a matchup that otherwise looks so unfair. I think a game plan that is play your normal mode, have Terapagos, start building Calm Minds, and go out on the offense is just so difficult to manage when constantly you're under Collision Course threat. And so the Heatran gives a really interesting angle at it. But it's such a great response to then have the Iron Crown to be able to deal with that in the end, and to have the Fire Terrestrialization on Koraidon that means it's relatively safe. It means that all the progress that Cayden was making was kind of fake progress.
Yeah.
It was Pokemon that weren't that important just being knocked out. The group on it wasn't critical for getting these KOs. The Fluttermane, if for an Icy Wind to finish off a low health Ogerpon, that was really all it needed to do. Because the rest of the work could be done by Koraidon just throwing Collision Courses repeatedly into the other slot, and a couple of Tachyon Cutters to finish those two Fairy types off.
It just reminds me of a horror film where you think that you're making progress throughout it, and it's just a part of the entire plan to get you trapped in the worst situation, even if you thought there was glimmers of hope throughout that. So I think that was really well played from Daniel. And I'm curious then where Cayden readjusts. Obviously, you talked about the struggles with the Trapagos in this matchup, and that's why we saw Cayden opt to leave it at home. But looking at these slower options that Cayden has, they weren't the answer either.
Yeah, I mean, it is not impossible, right? With double fakeouts, with Screamtail, with Follow Me, obviously you can't bring all 4 of those next to the Tropicals, but some mix of 3, you might be able to disrupt the collision course often enough to be able to get the boost and Cayden a fairly frail Pokemon. So that if you can get 1 boost, maybe 2, and then start going out with Terra Starstorm, you can pick up the KO on it. But of course, you know, the turns that you have fake out pressure, it can just protect, and you can't capitalize on those with Terra Starstorm, so it's always going to be like a couple of pieces. Maybe it's bluffing a fake out and going into Screamtail. There may be some path there. I wonder if Cayden will try it, or we'll just try with Heatran again. For now, just Heatran again.
So when we're looking at a lead back from this original match, Brute-Bonnet, Koraidon, Sun activated photosynthesis, and on the opposing end, this Ogerpon and the Heatran. Where can this go differently for Cayden? Because again, it looked like it was good early momentum, but where to go from there?
The early momentum came from Daniel kind of allowing outlet in one place, but he actually played it very safely. Think back to things like the Sucker Punch Flame Charge double up into Ogerpon, which allowed the Follow Me and the KO into Brute-Bonnet on that turn, but it meant that Cayden was 100% safe on that turn. Looking back at it, I'm not sure there was any turn that Cayden wasn't 100% safe. So Cayden's going to have to do more than just get kind of turns right throughout this. He's going to have to do something bigger to shift it up.
Well, it also looks like maybe eyeing up for Daniel to do something wrong in this one. If it is going to be the Terra Fairy Terastallization to try and Terra Blast, but Koraidon, again, you see a Koraidon hit the field, first thing you do is hit the Terastallization button. So you're not going to catch this Pokemon in a state of weakness at this point. Now it's going to be Terastallization apiece, and when we're eyeing up the other side, we saw this Heatran, so maybe just an attempt to double hit into this and you either catch it with the Terra Blast or with the Ivy Cudgel. That can maybe be the momentum you need, but then what can Brute-Bonnet do in its place? That's going to be the question going on for this match. But Ogerpon doesn't even try to go on the offensive and capitalize. Instead, center of attention. So Brute-Bonnet, again, Sucker Punch, but now I'm going to be looking at, is this going to be the same thing? Koraidon damage into this Ogerpon, and then a Heatran that doesn't really get to accomplish the most. That's going to be the thing. Koraidon even with the speed boost, and now Terra Blast. Is it Brute-Bonnet? Is it Koraidon? That is the question, and into this Koraidon, that is not going to be the damage.
Yeah, an optimistic stab there to throw the Terra Blast out and hope that Koraidon wouldn't Terastallize and a big risk would have been taken, but Daniel isn't taking big risks, just continuous safe plays. Goes for the Terastallization to make sure that Terra Blast isn't a threat. Goes for the Sucker Punch plus Flame Charge to make sure that the Ivy Cudgel isn't a threat. There was no option of inputs from Cayden's side there that actually gets meaningful damage onto Koraidon. It's not just about getting it right, it's about having to shift things up. And this ends up being a turn where very little is accomplished, and the Sturdy being gone is big, because now, that's what's forcing the Sucker Punch out, is that you need 2 hits to KO Ogerpon. Now, Koraidon continues to be very safe and only has to throw its own attack at Ogerpon that opens up the Brute-Bonnet to do anything else.
Spiky Shield, so you're not looking at losing this Ogerpon on this turn, so that could be a way to maybe get passed on through. And with the Koraidon attempting to eliminate this Pokemon now, you will be able to stick around, and that's going to be a little bit of just Spiky Shield damage done into this Koraidon. Spore, though, the second this Heatran is left susceptible, it's going to be asleep.
And crucially, the Brute-Bonnet faster than Heatran here. Doesn't need any kind of speed control, just isn't an Amoonguss. It's faster than that and gets over the Heatran to just put it to sleep and not even let it attack. Daniel just kind of has a stranglehold on this game, uses a Sucker Punch to make sure turn 1 is safe, and then once that little bit of pressure is relieved, lets Brute-Bonnet go out, play its own game plan, get Heatran put to sleep. We once again see no Tropicos. The game plan is Heatran, but right now that's a Heatran that is asleep and not threatening any significant damage to Koraidon and Ogerpon that has Sturdy broken. We saw the Incineroar and Screamtail. They're valuable disruptive pieces, but they're not meaningful damage, and you have to imagine that Iron Crown is once again in the back ready to deal with these Pokemon.
And every single Pokemon on this team, except for the Ogerpon, which only has 27 HP, is just Brute Bonnets for food. And at the Ogre Pond, if you needed to take care of the Cayden, well, the Cayden just goes first, can eliminate you, and then we fall back into the same question. Now you have 3 Pokemon that can just get spored. You've already used the Terastallization, so you can't go into the grass type for something like that Screamtail. Incineroar with the Rocky Helmet instead of the safety goggles, it's not going to help you out there. And this turn won't even be Spore, just start going for the damage. He tried with a Wake Up though, that's gonna be only the 1-turn Wake Up. So you're talking about a Brute Bonnet that can maybe feast a little bit, but hey, you can get rid of that Mushroom. So at least something on that turn going right for Cayden.
Something going right, gets the 1-hit KO, but this is exact kind of progress that didn't go anywhere in game 1. It's still important to make. You still have to KO all 4 Pokemon. It is still a strong turn for Cayden. The Ogre Pond already kind of wasn't going to accomplish anything as the slower Pokemon than Cayden, so you expect it to go down eventually. The Heatran gets the 1-turn sleep, gets the KO, evens the game at 3-3. Screamtail, I think, in sooner is really helpful this time because it can start playing that disruptive role without having to risk switching in. Remember that in game 1, it tried to switch in and just get 1-hit KO'd on the switch in by Tachyon Cutter. It's at least going to have a chance to attack this time since it'll be the fastest thing on the field.
Yeah, and there's an opportunity too to try, you're talking about those shenanigans, since you already have it on the field, you can maybe, like this one just be the double protect, but you can even look protect and try and disable next turn or something to try and slow Daniel down.
Right, you need to double protect, figure out what you can disable, what you can encore, what can Screamtail do that's going to have the most impact. Because otherwise it's a Flare Blitz going into Screamtail and it's a Tachyon Cutter going into Heatran. If you didn't have the threat of that disruption, then it's an easy gameplay. But no, it's just the collision course for now, and not Flare Blitz available to be disabled. Tachyon Cutter available to be disabled though.
Yeah, and when you're looking at these 2 Fairy-type Pokemon, that one is going to be the big crucial one. So if it was a lock into anything else, then you could have gone for it this turn, but then you could have been encored into it, which is going to be always the tricky thing when it is something like this Screamtail. Flare Blitz now though, again, Terrifier in the sun. Screamtail won't even have the chance to try and stop this Iron Crown. 1-hit KO, and now there is a Heatran on the other side that is looking to be in a rough spot. Tachyon Cutter, so much damage for the first one, and in the second here, I mean, that one was 1, but yeah, Heatran, that's okay, Citrus Berry. We're just slowly going through his move animation. There we go, now Heatran's officially gone, and we just have 1 Pokemon left for Cayden.
The Flame Charge into Ogre Pond on turn 1 means that Cayden is faster than Screamtail, denies even the chance of the disable, and just means that it's 2 KOs. The massive damage of Flare Blitz with the same type attack boost after the Fire Terastallization and with the Sun is just enormous in KOs. And, you know, Daniel has won this game, right? Has collision course coming into Incineroar, and just so well played to take a matchup advantage, right? He didn't have to make flashy plays or play out of his mind to win this game. He came in with a huge on-paper advantage and just needed to follow through on it.
And with the forfeit, it is now official. Congratulations, Daniel Yu. Top 4 here at the Atlanta Pokemon Regional Championships. And in such a strong series as well. Even when things in that first game, as we touched on, looked like it was maybe Cayden up, it was all just a part of Daniel's plan. And from the get-go in that game number 2, I mean, Cayden was hard-pressed to find anything.